Well, we're still walking with Walt.
We are.
This week, we're exploring the monorail system, which originally wasn't that interesting to me, but it's actually a very fascinating subject.
It is.
And ends up being yet another train that Walt Disney owned personally.
That's cool.
And the reasons for that are really interesting. So check this out, Disneyland Monorail. So the trains start by wandering around briefly in this area. I've always called this the forest.
It's got a lot of trees.
It's got a lot of trees, and then they promptly leave the park.
They do.
And head out by the highway. The train used to go over to the Disneyland Hotel, but these days it goes to the other theme park, California Adventure.
That is cool.
Isn't that neat? So it's an actual transportation system.
Thank goodness.
Now there was actually a predecessor to the monorail, this train. It was called the Viewliner. It's an actual train, as you can see, 30-inch gauge. It ran on a figure-8 shaped track, and there were two different trains, one left from a station in Fantasyland and one from a depot in Tomorrowland. It was a model of a real train.
Well, it looks like a 56 Chevy truck.
Well, same year, 56, and it was built by General Motors. They built two of these, one for the Pennsylvania Railroad and one for the New York Central. They were really built just as demonstration units to prove a concept. Now you can see that Disney's version is a little bit different than the real train. For one thing, it's made out of the miracle brand new substance of fiberglass.
Oh boy.
Now, it ran in that exact same area that we called the forest. Of course, back then there was no forest. The only trees that were back here were a few leftover orange trees from when this was all orange groves. The area was, in fact, completely undeveloped. In 1955, well, they just didn't have the time or money to do anything back here, so they just didn't. This hill is the dirt that was left over after they dug the moat for Sleeping Beauty's castle. And so they planted some trees on there just to form a visual barricade so you couldn't see the huge undeveloped area. They also put in some little walking paths and picnic tables so that people could have lunch there. So as you can see, the hill grew up.
It sure did.
In 1959, they built the Matterhorn on top of the hill. Maybe they just watered it and it grew, I'm not sure. And then just over here, they built the Autopia freeway, where kids could drive their own gasoline-powered car, ostensibly on a miniature California freeway.
Oh my.
And it was hugely popular. I loved it. And of course, it's still there, although it begs the question, why would anybody want to drive around in a miniature car on a California freeway?
That's a good question.
It looks sort of like the 405 at rush hour. So if that's the 405, then I guess this is the LA River, except this one has water in it. This kind of dirty little pond had a boat ride in it. These were the Phantom boats, and they were only around for 1955, and then they were taken out. I think they were just too expensive to have one ride operator hauling around two people in a little motorboat. It just didn't make any sense.
Imagine the wait time.
Oh, can you imagine? Although this does remind me of my uncle and his drinking buddies in their motorboats. Anyway, in 1956, the same year that the Viewliner made its appearance, those boats were replaced with these boats, and you got to drive those yourself. They ran on a guideway to keep them from running completely away, but just like the Autopia, you could steer and throttle it yourself. They were super successful, and they were actually around until 1993.
Wow.
Unfortunately, the Viewliner was not so lucky. It opened in June of 1956, and it closed in September of 1957.
Wow.
So it just wasn't around long at all, and it was really nifty. The problem was it was actually quite successful, and they wanted to replace it with something way cooler, the monorail. So in 1958, they tore all of this out and started putting in the new monorail system. Check this out. This is pretty neat. The two Viewliner trains passed each other right at the back of the figure 8, which was right next to the steam railroad tracks. As it happens, Disney really hated this weird anachronism. He didn't like seeing the antiques next to the futuristic stuff and said he wanted to change that. So even though this area had only been around for 2 years, in 1958 they just gutted the whole area out and turned it into that area we call the forest. Recognize this?
I sure do.
These are the parking trams, and they're designed to look like the old Viewliner as an homage to that lost ride.
This vehicle is leaving the station. Please hold on.
Anyway, as we all know, in 1959, the monorail opened, and it got a lot of international attention. Huge engineering success story.
Oh my.
Isn't that amazing?
That is just different.
In 1958, they just gutted that whole area. The pond gave way to the new submarine ride. You can see that they're putting in a complete second Autopia because that thing was so popular, and the monorail tracks are going in. Now, the corporation just freaked out at the idea of putting in this monorail. They said it has no business being in the theme park, and it's hugely expensive and just sort of pointless. And Disney shut the critics up by just writing out a check and paying for the whole thing himself. And that's how it ended up being the personal property of Walt and Lily. The submarine ride is still there.
It's just a little bit hard to get in and out of, though.
Isn't it? And for that reason, it was closed for, over 10 years, and it was set to be torn completely out until the whole thing was saved by a little tiny fish by the name of Nemo.
Ah, Finding Nemo.
And they turned it into the Finding Nemo submarine adventure. And these are actually the 7th generation of trains. They've gone through 6 complete sets of trains here. They refer to these as the Mark 7 trains. It's actually quite a long ride, taking you around in loops through the trees.
Wow.
And then out of the park and over to California Adventure. One of the cool things is you pass through the forbidden back spaces of Disneyland.
There you can sneak a peek.
Where you can sneak a peek, because they don't like the public to see this area, but there it is.
There it is.
Now, 2 weeks ago, we got to tour the locomotive shops back here. And the second floor of the locomotive shops is the monorail shop.
Wow.
Isn't that amazing?
That's amazing.
It's just really neat to see these things all lined up like this. They're really phenomenal.
Look like jet aircraft.
Don't they? They really are an amazing bit of technology. Hard to believe that this ride has been around since 1959, although these Mark 7 trains are pretty new. The system runs on 600 volts DC, and these are the rectifiers that supply that voltage to the track. So this is one of the Mark I trains from 1959.
Wow, they look futuristic. In fact, do I detect a Cadillac tail fin?
I think you do. It is 1959 after all. A 59 caddy fin on there. And notice that there's no glass in the windows. They're open-air cars, just like the Viewliner was. They're running mostly on the same tracks today that they were in this picture, but if you look closely, some of these tracks have been moved around just a little bit. Now, one of the really interesting things with all of these Disney cars is they're single-ended. They have a pilot at one end and kind of a little cockpit. This because these things never have to turn around and go back the other direction. So there's no reason to have operator controls at both ends like you'd find on a normal transportation system. Now, just 3 years later, ALWEG built another monorail, this time in Seattle.
And I've ridden that one.
Isn't that cool?
That's fun.
I rode it when it was brand new in 1962 for the Seattle World's Fair, the Century 21 Exposition. It's a much heavier system than the Disneyland system because it has to function as a real transportation machine. Unfortunately, it's still just a demonstration railroad. It goes from downtown Seattle out to the World's Fair site, and that's all.
Well, to the mall.
To the mall. But the original plan was to expand this all over Seattle, and, well, it just never happened. It's still running on the original tracks.
Wow, check out the cars, like a 55 Nomad.
Isn't that cool? Talk about an anachronism that might freak Disney out.
I'm sure.
But it's, you know, we have to remember that these things are a product of the 1950s. Mid-century classics, just like Pink Sinks. But ALWEG was really trying to push this as the transportation system of the future with Disney's support. In the early 1960s, Disney was really all about trying to create modern cities and futuristic transportation systems. And if you look closely out here in the forest, you can find one of the artifacts of one of Disney's other experiments in mass transportation. If you look closely, there's some abandoned tracks of an old ride. These are the abandoned tracks of the old People Mover system that was hugely popular in the 1970s, but later on it was abandoned and some of the track torn out. But if you look around, most of the track is still here. It's just not used for anything anymore. Because they haven't torn this out, it makes me think that maybe someday they're going to bring it back.
The People Mover, they need to.
Wouldn't that be cool? It was one of my favorite rides here. And frankly, Disney parks need all of the help they can get in moving people around. My feet are still killing me.
And mine look like Daisy Ducks.
So this stuff is more than just fun. It's a legitimate transportation need that they have here at Disneyland.
Almost a necessity.
And speaking of which, what do you suppose happened to the old Mark 6 trains?
That's a good question.
They sold them to Las Vegas to use as an actual monorail to get up and down the strip.
You about need to.
You'll notice they don't look like Disney trains.
What, no bling or tail fins?
Well, it is Las Vegas, so maybe they should. They were sent to Salt Lake City, Utah to be reworked into something with controls at both ends and a substantially different look. So even as you're watching this video, these things are shuttling slightly inebriated gamblers up and down the strip. But unfortunately, in spite of ALWEG and Disney's vision, these things just haven't really caught on that much as a transportation system in the United States. But it's really hard to imagine any kind of Disney theme park that isn't totally connected together by some sort of monorail transportation network. And who knows, maybe someday they will start popping up in various cities all over the United States. Just never know. Well, there you go. That's the monorail system at Disneyland. And of course, every Disney theme park has a monorail,
Monorail.
because Walt Disney was the grand poobah of the cult of the monorail people.
Yeah, they're cool.
And they're cool. They're cool. And there's a lot of people out there who really believe in monorails and
Right.
would really like to see a monorail in every neighborhood.
Well, that would be cool.
And, you know, I get it. I understand. Yeah, they're really nifty. Well, if you haven't been over to the channel, do pop on over to the channel. And if you're not a subscriber,
Oh, boy.
do subscribe, because then you'll get alerts, and then you get another alert, because you got the alert. Anyway,
The world
you get
needs more
you get alerty.
Yes, the world needs more alerts.
You need more alerts. And so, anytime we upload anything, you'll get an alert, and that's cool. And the easy way to subscribe, zoink, the blue button right here that says subscribe. Click on this. If you don't see it, it's because your device doesn't support it, which is sort of tragic. But if there's a blue button right here that says subscribe, go ahead and click it. It'll make you a subscriber. Well, we're not sure how you found this movie on the internet. We hope you didn't find it boring. And we will see you here again next Sunday as we continue walking for Walt just a little bit more. See you then. Bye-bye.
Bye.